You.
Dude,
Yeah,
really
Ben,
good.
by the way, this is my good friend Leo. Leo,
Hey,
this is
Leo.
Ben.
Very
Good to
nice
connect,
meet you,
brother.
man.
Yeah, good to connect, man. So what's the premise? What are we talking about?
Oh, well, basically, we have a podcast where we like to interview interesting people.
So you're,
Mostly,
so you're into psychedelics, Leo.
no, not like, well, Pikal, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
No, not so much. I'm into dealing with cognitive imbalances that I was born with or that I developed through experiences in my life. So, but I am very, very big fan of Shulgin himself.
Yeah, he's amazing.
I'm planning to write a similar book about my own experience with using molecules to change the function of my brain.
What molecules do you use?
A lot of molecules. I've used
Yeah.
everything. Yeah, yeah. But
Pretty cool.
but it
Arsenal of molecules.
yeah, I've used everything that's in production really, and I'm planning to produce some molecules myself. Well, Nick and I are planning to.
Were you a chemist or what do you do?
No, not at all. I have no background in chemistry or biology. My background's in science, but in statistics and study design mainly. I have degrees from Carnegie Mellon and the London School of Economics. But basically, the channel is actually about biohacking. It's called Leo and Longevity. And I'm mainly interested in longevity. But you know what I discovered is that there's so many people interested in longevity. So I sort of carved myself a niche in a subject that I was personally interested in, which is what I call cognitive enhancement. But other people, when they say cognitive enhancement, I think they mean like improving memory, improving focus, and so on. For me, it's really bettering one's ability to experience life and having better well-being. Because to me,
Yeah.
the brain is the soul.
Elevating consciousness, right? And to me that means, as you say, seeing what exists beyond what you currently are able to experience. You know, you have five senses that perceive the world, and there's so much beyond that. And if you can raise your awareness to those things, there's bliss that lives beyond what you perceive.
Yeah, and I think that's. Are you into psychedelics? That sounds like you're very into psychedelics.
No, I wouldn't say I've experienced them, but I wouldn't say I'm into them. But there's certainly some interesting things that exist beyond our senses, you know?
So the way I think of this is a very interesting discussion to me. So the way I think of that is sort of like those psychedelic experiences with psilocybin or DMT. Sometimes ibogaine. Ibogaine is less of a, what I'm trying to say is that these are to me subjective experiences that can be spiritual and life changing. And to me, like I sort of follow the Jungian thought about spirituality. So I feel like spiritual experiences are very powerful and they can change us in a one-time event. But for me, I'm more focused on like permanent problems that we have. So for example, people who have trauma in their childhood develop smaller hippocampuses. They develop usually upregulated HPA axes. And so these are the kind of things I try to deal with myself. Like, for example, since I was 10 years old, I had a tremor in my hand and it increased as I got older. It seemed to be GABA. You know, people who have childhood trauma, they have GABA dysfunction.
Deficiencies, sure.
Yeah, exactly. GABA.
So what are you doing to overcome that?
Well, I've overcame it mostly through neurotrophic factors over a long period of time.
Like what?
SSRIs, as well as direct injection of bovine neurotrophic factors.
Interesting.
So, yeah. So basically, have you ever read the book The Brain That Changes Itself?
Of course, Norman Deutsch. First one I ever read on neuroplasticity.
Yeah. So that's what inspired me. In 2014, I was really suffering with GABAergic dysfunction, both due to abuse of some molecules as well as my history. I read that book and I tried to see how much I could use it in my own life. But we want to interview you, so I don't want to keep
talking. Ben will go deep.
Turn the tables.
Yeah, you turned the table very quickly. That was very interesting. So Ben, I wanted to apologize a little bit because I'm actually not into bodybuilding specifically. I've always been.
Why do you apologize for that?
Well, because I'll explain why. But basically, my background in athletics is only in powerlifting and arm wrestling. I was a competitive arm wrestler. But Nick, of course, is a bodybuilder. So I think we're going to have a very interesting...
Nick, you're a bodybuilder?
Was.
What's your underwear model?
Might have been as well. But so I think we're going to have an interesting experience interviewing you because I knew, of course, I heard your name many times over the years, but I've had so many podcasts this week. When I was trying to research you, I got shocked to discover that you have a huge YouTube channel with a wonderful podcast. And there's just so much material for me to cover that I couldn't very well research you, but I think I have a framework with which we can ask.
Yeah, we can go down any rabbit hole you want, man. We'll go down some interesting rabbit holes.
To begin with, one interesting question I had was, I actually found it quite hard to find interviews of you. And the last
I don't take a lot of interviews. The only reason I took it because I like Nick. I love Nick.
Yeah, people were really surprised. They told me, "How did you get Ben on the podcast?" I said, "See, Nick."
I was actually surprised you actually did do it, to be honest.
Me too, actually. So here's the truth, man. I mean, everyone in the world has a podcast, and I'm just not interested, man. Like I love talking to people, but my time is so valuable. Like, the hour that I'll spend on here with you guys, I've got a list of things to do that's a mile long that like are very high priority to me. So I never say that I'm busy, but I just say that I value my time, and it doesn't mean I'm belittling someone else's time. It's just like, there's so many things that I want to do that are high priority tasks to me. And if I don't do those things, they don't get done. And I end up filling my days with low priority tasks. And, I just minimize my, I'm not trying to grow my notoriety right now, right? I'm trying to grow my understanding of things and my wisdom in my business. So if I was trying to go through a phase of like, hey, I'm trying to grow my Instagram or my public reach or my notoriety or whatever, I would do these things. But I normally, for the time being, at least in this phase of my life, it's just not a high priority for me.
Okay, so we'll try to keep it brief then. So we'll stay to the important
You got my time, man.
You have a Wikipedia page, and so people can visit that to understand your background. You're Canadian, you're a bodybuilder. You're well known for being having a scientific approach to bodybuilding. I would like to begin with one thing. How was Canada growing up as being an aspiring bodybuilder in Canada? Because what I've noticed is that Canada has really risen up in terms of the prolificness of the bodybuilders. How has it changed since you were younger, and how do you think of it now with Ian Valliere, Antoine, and all of these kind of guys coming out of Canada?
So when I started, it seemed as though no one had really gone beyond, Canada. So Paul Dillette had been a really successful bodybuilder from Canada, but he, quickly moved from Montreal down to Venice, and he was considered an American by most. But in 20 years prior to me being there, nobody. And Fouad Abiad, him and I came up kind of at the same time, and he was very competitive with me.
He's a good friend of mine.
Yeah, I didn't.
No, I was joking. No.
Okay, no. I have no issue with Fouad whatsoever. He had an issue with me.
Not for you, it's for the audience.
Yeah, I never had an issue with him. I thought he was just somebody else I was competing against. So here's I guess my awareness of what U.S. bodybuilding was different than most, because when I was 17 years old, my dad took me to Olympia. I was 160 pounds, just started bodybuilding, or what I call bodybuilding. And I said, hey, can we go to this? He goes, sure. So we drove down to the John Bassett Theater in New York at Madison Square Garden. It was 98. First year, Ronnie won. I was 160 pounds. And I was hooked, man. And I was like, this is what I want to do. Next year, I went back to the Olympia in Vegas, and I was 230 or 235, in 12 months. And everyone goes, holy shit, what the hell did you do? And I was like, man, I just committed, and I trained twice a day. And I went from being a long distance runner and a vegetarian to, being basically a carnivore and training twice a day. And I just had a different perspective on what I was going to do. So it was no longer for me about being a good Canadian. It was no longer about being the biggest guy in my gym. I was like, I just want to be the best in the world. I want to be able to stand there with Flex Wheeler and Ronnie Coleman and Jay Cutler and all these other guys that became my idols and my role models. And, most people, as I put on all this muscle, like, man, you look amazing. Or, are you big enough yet? And in my mind, I wasn't even close. Like, I was like, until I look like those guys, well, I'm not even close. So that was my focus. So looking back on it now, I created what I call a world-class standard, right? I looked at the best in the world and I said, that's where I'm going to be. And until I'm there, all these roadblocks and obstacles and diversions along the way are just a distraction. So I just kept going and going and going until I achieved what I wanted to achieve.
Okay. I want to be efficient. So the next question I wanted to ask you is, there's this science of hypertrophy training that you talk about. I haven't, gotten that much into it. I'm very curious because I read a lot of academic papers myself in different fields, but not actually in exercise science. I know you have a degree in kinesiology, which I assume is somewhat like exercise science, or that's what it means.
Yep.
And so how prolific is the literature in hypertrophy training? Is it something that serious academics take study?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, so there are serious academics studying now, but I think as far as the actual research, I would say it's primitive. It's very primitive and misunderstood, not misunderstood necessarily, but just very little understanding. There's probably 3 to 5 guys in the world right now who are really, really good. First guy comes to mind is Dr. Andy Galpin. He's exceptional. Dr. Eddie Joe is exceptional. I'm sure there's other guys I'm missing. There's one guy out of.
I was going to ask you actually.
Yeah, Dr. Andy Galpin, I think, is the best. There's a few other guys who are worth mentioning, but man, what I find in the science space, and it's really unfortunate that the egos are so massive that they refuse to come at life with an open mind. And this is not Dr. Galpin or Dr. Joe, and which is why I put them on high regard, is they refuse to come with an open mind with the intent to learn, to actually understand. They just get so myopic in, well, the research says this. Well, the research is fucking bullshit. And it's all founded ultimately on what guys like myself, guys like Nick are learning. Like we're the research, right? We're the ones who initiate like what should be researched. And the fact that most people just poo-poo what bodybuilders say is just ignorant to me. And as soon as someone tries to discredit what something a bodybuilder's done, it's just dumb. It may not be the best path. It may not be the most accurate, but it's succeeded. So you have to explore, okay, what about this? How do I objectify this? And what about this has been successful? And maybe what about this could be better? And that's the way I approach it always, is like, and I've learned from people much smarter than me, and I stand on the shoulder of giants. And the only reason I was able to do things differently than some people is because I took what they did really, really well, and I loved it and I utilized it, but I also explored like, hey, this isn't really working for me. So what would I do differently if I wanted to improve this, this, and this? So it gives you like, I have things that are grounded in practicality, meaning this has worked. And then I'm experimenting and I'm exploring with everything else until I find something that works for me. And then I realize, well, that only works for me. And it may be some varying degree of that works for somebody else. So being attached to, this is what the science says, is just so closed-minded. And I think it's where the limitations exist in science today.
Yeah, we can take a corollary to that in the brain neurological literature as well. So, for example, like SSRIs, people who study them know that, well, originally there was a serotonin hypothesis of depression and a serotonin hypothesis of anxiety as well. And later there was a thought that maybe the neurogenesis, because SSRIs don't work for the first 3 months or so. Usually they say 3 months, but in my experience, it takes about 6 to 7 months for people to feel the effects. And so people realized that neurogenesis was increasing, particularly the upregulation of brain-derived neurotrophic factor was happening really at that 6 months, 7 months or so. So there was the neurogenesis hypothesis. Then there's also a neuroinflammation hypothesis, because they noticed that SSRIs reduced inflammation in the nervous system. But the interesting thing in the literature is that this literature is not getting to psychiatrists. Psychiatrists are just using the SSRIs, not trying to address the inflammation separately, and not trying to go directly after the neurotrophic factors.
I think 10 years ago, psychiatrists weren't because they were just told the SSRIs were the cure. And they're like, oh, great, we found a cure, just prescribe it. But now, I have psychiatrists on the show often, and they are doing it. They are taking a more integrated, holistic approach, and there's lots of them. But it took time, right? If you're told that steroids are the key to building muscle, everyone goes, okay, just give them steroids, everything's good. Well, then we realize, steroids works for 1% of the population, but the 99% of the rest of the people are failing. So what are the other things that actually cause hypertrophy, right? It's kind of the same thing that happened through the 90s. All through the 90s was like, just take more juice, you're going to get bigger. Like some guys did, and everybody else just got sick or died. And like, okay, well, this is effectively the same thing that's happened with SSRIs, right? You give it to a certain percentage of the population. Some people get really, really good. But then everyone else realizes like, hey, didn't work for me. So what are the other things I should be looking at, right? It seems like, and I think most science is limited because of measuring ability, right? Like you're limited by your technology. You're limited by your ability to measure. So as we see this exponential growth curve in technology, obviously the research will be much more enriched.
Yeah, but specifically just to defend SSRIs for a bit, they only do not work in people with particular genetic polymorphisms in their growth factors like BDNF.
How do you objectify work?
Well, I'm talking about, well, subjective assessment scores of depression. Really,
Right. Yeah. And how about suicide and other negative side effects? And
suicide is different. The upregulation of suicide happens in a couple of weeks, but a psychiatrist usually doesn't give an SSRI to someone that's suicidal. They give them lithium.
I mean, we could get into semantics about brain stuff, and I'm certainly not an expert in psychiatry, so I won't, but everything's got ups and downs, right? I'm not going to advocate something that clearly has many negative side effects.
No, I disagree about that. That's saved a lot of lives. A tremendous.
Oh, of course it has. Of course,
psychiatry, it's the most effective medication in the history of psychiatry. So it would be like in cardiovascular. It would be like saying statins have many negative side effects. They do, but they've saved more lives than any drug in cardiovascular disease history. You know what I mean? It's really very similar, I think. But anyway, I was just trying to say that study design is limited and experimental experience is valuable, and we're limited in scientists are limited in the laboratory with what the validity of the study design as it reflects the external world. Whereas you guys are experiment. But what was interesting about what you were saying was that you were personally experimenting with different kinds of, I suppose, training methods.
Well, everything, training, recovery, nutrition, supplements, everything.
What were the main themes of what you discovered that was different than, I read that you grew up idolizing to some degree Dorian Yates and Lee.
Yeah.
And Dorian Yates has this interesting training philosophy, which in my very uneducated experience, it seems to be that many people who follow it quickly develop injuries within a few years, serious injuries. Did you follow that kind of methods? Did you come up with your own?
No, I followed many different methods, and Dorian was just a great role model to me. I really loved his warrior mentality, his strength, his character strength. That was what I really admired about Dorian, like his training methods. He was far beyond his years, and I could take 20 minutes and go down the path of explaining why his method works for some people and why it doesn't for others, and how it may be something to aspire to, but certainly will not be something that works for beginners. If you'd like to make that the topic of conversation, we can.
I'm really curious. Yeah.
Sure. So when you are you're learning to a skill, you're learning anything new, you're new to a skill, you would assume your ability to do it proficiently isn't high, right? Your level of proficiency is relatively low. So when we look at skill acquisition, whether it be trying to play the piano or learn a new language or do a squat or a deadlift, all relative degrees of skill, what would you assume is the most appropriate frequency with which to practice your skill? In the beginning.
I would think that in the beginning, you would want to program your neurological system to develop expertise in that movement pattern.
Right. So how often would you do it?
As frequently as possible.
Right, exactly. So your ability to, if you're doing a squat or a deadlift or any exercise, your ability to produce force is very low because the nervous system doesn't understand orchestration. It doesn't understand stability. So you're teaching the brain how to scale skill and stability, right? This neurological orchestration of both skill and stability. As a beginner, doing something once a week or once every 4 days or one set to something makes absolutely no sense. You have to train the nervous system to become efficient and effective at doing the skill. And the better and better you get at the skill, eventually, let's say, for example, and this is an overgeneralization, but let's say if I could do everything 5 days a week. I could effectively train full body 5 days a week because my ability to produce force is like zero. Like it's very minimal. You're 16 years old, 15 years old, or even in your mid-20s, if you've never trained before, your ability to contract the muscles is poor. So that means little muscle damage, little inflammation, little energy depletion, right? So I could effectively do it 4 or 5 times a week. But the better you get at that skill, the more damage you create. Therefore, the more time you're going to need between workouts. So you may go from 4 or 5 times a week to 3 times a week. Now you can space it out Monday, Wednesday, Friday, because you need a little more time between workouts to replenish the energy, replenish the ATP, decrease the inflammation, and recover the little bit of damage you created, right? The better and better you get at the skill, now you need more time between workouts. So eventually you progress your way to where you're doing it once every 4 or 5 days. Right. And like, oh, wow, okay, now I need this 4 or 5 days between workouts to recover from the damage imparted in that one workout. And eventually you're like, okay, now I'm doing 12 to 15 sets to elicit the amount of signal I need to build a muscle. So let's say I'm doing a workout every 5 days and I'm doing about 12 to 15 sets. Well, if I continue to get better and better and better at that skill, eventually I can actually do less and less and less, because eventually I'm so good at that skill cognitively and physically from a level of a nervous system. I can produce so much effort in one set or two sets or five sets that it takes that long to recover, right? But how long do you think it takes for me to get from, low-level beginner, never having lifted a weight, to being to the point where I can do one set with so much effort and intensity that I'm creating muscle damage and depletion of energy stores and inflammation?
Years.
Minimum 10 years, minimum, probably closer
Yeah.
to 15, right?
Yeah.
And people go, oh, yeah, for sure. And so people go, oh, well, I'm going to train like Dorian Yates, and I've been training for like 2 or 3 years. I'm like, well, have fun with that. Good luck. And why do people get injured is because their skill is inappropriate. So if let's say you're, Leo, you're driving a car, you're driving a Ferrari and you're going 60 miles an hour, and your alignment's a little fucked up, but at 60 miles an hour, you don't notice. You step on the gas and you try to go 120, you're going to know everything about your alignment being fucked up, and you're probably going to blow an axle, right? So that's exactly what's happening with people getting injured, is that they think that they know how to do something. Their skill is good enough, right? They're good enough to do it with some degree of effort. But when you start putting real appropriate loads on there, all of a sudden, gosh, now things start to hurt. And that has nothing to do with your inability to do it. It's just you don't have the skill yet, right? It's not like I can't build that muscle. I haven't spent enough time in the skill acquisition phase, which is what literally my entire business is built around. So everyone in the world is focusing on progressive overload, right? Sets and reps and volume and load. And I'm like, great, that's fucking awesome. That's a big part of hypertrophy. But you're all missing the principal foundation of like, hey, you got to learn how to dribble the basketball before you can play with LeBron James. So let's go in and learn how to, the metaphor I often use is like, if you want to be a concert pianist and you want to play the piano, you don't just go in and go, hey, I'm going to play like fucking Elton John today, right? You're like, first I have to learn to use one finger, and then maybe eventually I'm doing something faster. But it's going to take me years and years and years to reach what we call unconscious competence, right? So what's unconscious competence? When Elton John sits down at the piano to play the piano, he doesn't fucking think, he feels, right? And that's ultimately where we get to as professional bodybuilders. I don't go under a squat and I got 700 pounds on my back and think. You fucking die. You just do, because at that point it's unconscious. And hopefully by that point the skill is adequate that you don't get hurt. And this is the dichotomy between people using steroids and getting injured, is like under steroids, you're going to get stronger faster, oftentimes than your skill is able to maintain. So skill is a graded process, right? So I can have the skill to use 20 pounds with a dumbbell for, let's say, bench press. That doesn't mean I also have the skill and stability to do 30 pounds or 40 pounds or 50 pounds. So if my strength is going up geometrically almost, and my stability isn't going up at that level because it takes time to develop the skill and stability, that's when injuries happen.
This was like so helpful for me, by the way. I was very curious how, but I have a couple of questions. So were you influenced by like the Bulgarian training, Pavel? I mean, Pavel's very commercialized, but that kind of grease the groove stuff, and looking at expertise also in others. Like you mentioned piano, so you were looking at expertise in general.
Skill acquisition, man. I was looking at the learning skill. So when I finally early in my career, and for most of my career, to be honest, I had muscle building strengths. I had very good strengths and I had weaknesses. So I came of this mentality of like, well, why are these things weak? And in the first 5 years of my career, it was just about more, right? I was like, work harder, work harder, work harder. And I worked harder than most people, and I didn't get the results I wanted. I got a bunch of injuries. So I started to explore, well, I'm not going to settle. Like I had this goal of being Mr. Olympia. And I was like, I'm not going to settle with accepting the fact that I can't build this muscle. I'm going to explore something new. So out of necessity, I started exploring, what does it look like to really improve the effectiveness and efficiency of this skill? Because I realized, I guess stepping back a little bit, I realized that there was a difference between how my body distributed tension and load and how somebody else's body distributed tension and load, right? So if Nick does a row, his back responds really well. If I do a row, my back doesn't. So we have different anatomical realities, right? We have different structures. So some people have long muscle bellies, some people have short muscle bellies. Some people have a big rib cage, some people have a small rib cage. Some people have long femurs, short femurs. Everyone has different physical realities. So I started to explore my own physical realities and go, okay, I can build all of these muscles equally because it's the same internal environment. It's the same hormonal environment. It's the same growth factor environment. So what is missing? What's the missing piece? Well, it's tension. It's me not sticking the adequate or appropriate amount of tension or maximum tension to the muscles that I want to be training. So I started exploring skill acquisition, and ultimately how to understand the biomechanics of human movement. And that's where this all progressed from.
Can I ask you, how does one because I've never studied hypertrophy stuff. So how does one as a bodybuilder, I mean, you can realize something's not working for you. Like you're bent over rowing 405, your back is not big, that's not working for you. How do you realize what works for you? Because it's hard to judge if your back is growing. You don't keep
Well, man, it's the same way you do any research. You don't do it once and go, oh, I'm not sure. I think it's not working. And that's I think what most people do, right? Yeah. Most people want instant gratification. They want to know like, hey, I got a PR today on Instagram. Whereas for me, it was like, hey, I'm going to do this program for 8 to 12 weeks. And I'm going to do the same thing over and over and over and over to the point where it's unconscious. And I've reached unconscious competence, and I've done an extended period of time. And I go, okay, have I grown or have I not grown? Oh. And when I see appropriate changes over an extended period of time, then we know, right? It either worked or it didn't work.
Extended trial, that's your
course.
Yeah, that's
of course.
A lot of.
Well, man, it wasn't patience. It was the fact that I never saw an end for me. Like I didn't think I was ever going to stop bodybuilding. Right. So I was like, well, I'll just keep going. If this didn't work, what's next? If this didn't work, what's next? It was always just this like trial and error progressing to, I just didn't think I was ever going to stop. I was like, I'm just going to keep going until I'm, 7-8 time Mr. Olympia.
But I never, when you were at that point in your life where, I forgot what big show you placed. I think it was the Arnold you placed really high in that one of those last showings that you did. But you were also progressing really rapidly at the end there where your chest and back arms were not your dominant body parts, but they were becoming much better and improved at the end of your career. Why did you just suddenly, because obviously you had legs was obviously your strongest point, but once you were getting that progress that you always wanted at the end there, why did you decide to just wrap it up at the end there? Because I never actually
it had nothing to do with bodybuilding at that point, man. Like I knew I understand bodybuilding. Right. I just knew there was bigger things for me, man. So bodybuilding was something I did almost out of necessity, Nick. Like, you've heard my story around this stuff, but like I was a very fearful kid. My dad had a very explosive temper. Right. I was a very fearful kid. So that was my armor, man. Bodybuilding was my armor. And I thought it was what I wanted. I thought it's what it fulfilled me. And then being able to compete at the highest level, realized I didn't change how I felt about myself, didn't change my security. I didn't change, any of those things. And then when my children were born.
Why you bodybuilded, but you're so time efficient, I didn't ask you, because we usually ask people, we have this idea about the armor and a lot of us being weak when we're younger. Sorry to interrupt you, but I had the exact same experience.
Yeah. Mine was just physical, right? I literally built a physical armor. Some people build this harsh personality as their armor, right? Some people do. And I see it, man. And man, I think we have some mutual friends, Nick, who I see it on them, and I have so much sympathy and empathy for them. I'm just like, man, I know where you're at, and I don't condemn them. I'm not angry with them. I just you empathize. You're like, man, I know where you are.
Yeah. And you managed not to develop that like a similar personality to your father, even though he had that kind of temper.
What was your question, Leo?
I was asking if you managed to, a lot of us that grew up with violent fathers, or not violent, but like bad tempered, we adopt sometimes their personalities accidentally.
I think it's either one or the other, right? You either learn how you're going to be, or you learn how you absolutely will not be. And for me, it was the second one. It was like, my dad taught me so much in life, and mostly it was what I don't ever want to be. Right? He taught me a lot of things that I do want to be. Like, he's got some great traits, but as far as parenting, it was like, here's this huge checklist of things that I don't ever want to be to my kids. I don't ever want them to say this and this and this and this. And that was my biggest learning opportunity. We either learn by seeing models of what we want to do or models of what we don't want to do, right? Yeah. So for me, my dad was a brilliant teacher for me.
Sometimes I feel like some people develop like a subconscious mimicry that later in life they notice, oh, wait a minute, like I don't have kids, but for example, like, I had a stressful day. I came home and wait a minute, I just yelled at my kid by accident. And I remember my father, so I go to my kid and apologize. And that's in my way of correcting it, but it's subconscious. Does that happen to you?
No.
Wow.
So the beauty of life is life gives you opportunities to become more conscious, right? When I say raising the consciousness of humanity as being one of my goals, it's like, I want to be present in the way that I show up for anyone, right? The way that I show up in an interview, the way that I show up in a coaching environment, the way that I show up in a leadership environment, the way that I show up in a business environment, in a family environment. All those need to be intentional, right? I want to be conscious of my actions. And man, I started my personal transformation journey in 2007 because I realized there was people in my life who were able to press buttons in me that made me act in a way that didn't feel in alignment with who I was. And I was like, what is this? Why is this there? And it was like, well, you're reacting rather than being present and conscious and responding, right? Reaction versus responsiveness. So responsiveness in my mind is I'm able to choose my response, versus a reactiveness is it's just a reaction, right? I don't think about it, it just happens. And being conscious and present in that moment and is the key to, I think, success in every aspect of life. Is if I can be aware and make a conscious response or conscious decision on how I'm going to respond, I think I've got a superpower over 90% of the population, because most people aren't conscious of their actions, right?
You know, in the brain, we have these kind of like connective, like, so we have this thing, I think you probably studied it, the default mode network.
Of course. Yep.
Network, and then the executive control network. So you're basically tuning your brain maybe through mindfulness to go through the executive control network all the time.
Right.
Is that what it is?
Yep, exactly. Yep. We're just trying to disconnect the amygdala, right? We're trying to disconnect that primal response.
Yeah.
And so, man, I think it's important, to be able to access those primal reactions and responses when you want them consciously, but not when you don't let them control you, right? Who's in control? You know, are you riding the ego, or is the ego riding you at the end of the day?
We share a lot in common. These are a lot of my personal interests as well. And then when you were asking in the beginning what I was trying to do with my brain, it's sort of to disconnect the amygdala, to put the executive control network in power, and to avert some of my natural tendencies as well. But you seem much more put together than me. I think you've developed more of the mindfulness than I have.
Well, out of necessity, Leo, I think it's, when you have, and Nick may have seen aspects of this, is like when you have the amount of fire that I have in my soul, it's my greatest gift, right? But your greatest gift is often your greatest curse. So my fire was my greatest gift as a bodybuilder, but I knew that if I continued to do that, I wouldn't have always had a great life. I would have turned into something that was destructive rather than constructive. So bodybuilding was an absolute gift to me to allow me to express that fire, literal fire, maybe not literal, but as close to literal as we can get.
It was pretty close.
I had some fire. But now, man, and so most people would try to repress that, right? Most people would say, well, no, that's not me, or that, I don't want that in my life. Man, I realize my fire is my gift. So it's the idea of, if you talk about Jung, you talk about the shadow, right? We talk about acknowledging your shadow and loving your shadow. And I realize the reason I am the man who I am is because of my fire. And I will never, ever, ever disregard that or discredit that. And I love my fire. My fire is what allows me to step into a room with anybody and not feel insecure and not feel fearful anymore. So I honor it. And so the fact that I can see those things and know that I'm in control is a powerful place to come at life, right? I'm able to be more calm. I'm able to be less reactive because I know if I need it, it's there, but I don't need to use it, right?
What was when you got to that fork in the road at your bodybuilding career and your personal life was maybe you're having your first kid, if I remember. Was that the main reason why you decided to go right instead of left for bodybuilding? Was the
100%, man. My kids were, this sounds so cliche, but I literally think those children are my angels sent to me to save my life. Both of us were on a path, right? Like, I was a little further along than you, maybe a little older, but
same thing.
We were on a path. Yeah, we're on a destructive path to, bodybuilding, as wonderful as it is, as much as it can be a gift, can be, again, a blessing and a curse, can be destructive if you want. And I was of most bodybuilders, healthier than most, but, still, it's not healthy to walk around at 310, 320 pounds all the time and continually getting bigger and having one focus and being selfish all the time and not considering anyone else. It was important for me to, the only thing in my life, or the only thing that could have saved my life was my angels. There's nothing else that could, short of me dying or even if I got really injured, I think I would have still continued. Yeah. So even after my son, I was like, oh, this is going to be great. We're going to train together. We're going to be little buddies. And then when it was my daughter, man, my heart just exploded open. And I was like, I just can't be the same person anymore.
Yeah. I had a very hard time once I even just found love in my life, my fiance. And that was like one of the hardest things to turn that on and off for me at the time. This is going back, 2015, right after I turned pro, 2014. And it was even just on that level of coming home, being comforted and having someone in my life that's special, that I'm like going to the gym and turning into this monster and then having to come home and turn it off. I had a very hard time doing that, because when I was, you were very similar. When we were in our zone for bodybuilding, that was all it just took us over, basically. That was me 24/7. And to be living with somebody and coming home and being that man, it was never going to work. And then obviously building that.
I'd love to offer perspective to both you and the audience, Nick. It's like, so what you're talking about is the autonomic nervous system, right? So if you know anything about the autonomic nervous system, think of it as having like two branches. One is arousal and one is calm, right? One is like the gas pedal, like I want to run through walls. Yeah. The other one is the brake.
So very educated. They know about the sympathetic and
who is the audience?
Talk about that all the time.
Well, so all you're doing, Nick, and if this helps me or helped me. So when you're going in the gym and you're accessing this person, this avatar that you create in your mind that needs to be ruthless, you're just literally anchoring huge amounts of sympathetic arousal, right? So you're just really dialing up the volume or the brightness on that sympathetic nervous system. And then when you're at home, you want to be in the other end. You want to be in the parasympathetic, right? And the reality is you can absolutely control that. I can absolutely access the warrior and the monk, right? And that's the way I envision it in my brain, is like, when I'm training, I'm a warrior. And when I'm home, I'm a monk. You can absolutely access it like that. And that's an indication of a healthy nervous system.
Right.
So if I can access the high, like if I can squat 700 pounds and then 20 seconds later, I'm sitting on the floor playing with my daughter and we're playing with Barbies.
Right.
To me, that's the highest state of readiness. That's the highest state of mental and physical preparedness, because your nervous system is adaptable.
Right.
And that should be an aspirational quality for most of us. Most people don't know that's possible. We kind of think of them as like separate, right?
Yeah.
But in reality, it's just a continuum. And like, I don't always want to have to squat 700 pounds and be an animal.
Yeah.
And I don't always want to have to be playing Barbies with my daughter on the floor. But it's a continuum, right? It exists kind of on this.
Absolutely.
Well, have you been able to do that? Are you able to access your sympathetic nervous system and turn it off?
Very much so. And it's all done through the breath now, Leo. So I do it through the breath. I do it through intentional accessing muscle tension. So if you could imagine, like the autonomic nervous system, when you're sympathetically aroused, let's say someone right now just throws a lot. There's a snake over your shoulder. Leo, watch out. And you're like, oh shit. So your nervous system, your muscular system tenses up. So I think, and I don't know this yet, but I think by intentionally increasing the muscular contraction, I can ramp up sympathetic arousal, right? I know that by increasing the rate of my breath, I can increase sympathetic arousal. So I'll intentionally do that. And I'll also have to do with the visual system. So you can also focus your eye gaze like on a single point, and that will ramp up the nervous system as well. So if I'm going into a workout, I'm intentionally trying to increase muscle tone. I'm trying to increase breath rate and increase or narrow the field of vision. If I'm trying to turn it off, I'm super conscious of extending my exhalation as long as I can while I relax my breath, like I'm floating on water, and diverting my visual system so it's more of a panoramic view. All those things, like set to set, minute to minute in the workout, gives me greater control. You're just literally trying to learn how to control this thing, right? So most people just don't have conscious control of their autonomic nervous system. And that sounds weird, but the autonomic nervous system is maybe incorrectly named, because we know we do have access to it, conscious access. It isn't actually autonomic. So I think knowing you can do that, it should be trained. So here's an example. If I get on a bike right now and I do a 60-second all-out sprint, my nervous system's on high alert, huge amount of arousal. Now, instead of letting my body come down at whatever rate it wants to, I should consciously become aware of the fact that I'm trying to slow down my breathing rate. I'm trying to slow down my heart rate. I'm trying to relax my muscular system. That allows that consciously to bring down the sympathetic and increase the parasympathetic. So I'm literally gaining conscious access of these systems.
I'm surprised to hear someone has done this effectively. I mean, obviously our audience, I'm sure everyone's heard of Wim Hoff.
Millions of people are doing it effectively. Maybe not millions, but certainly thousands.
No, I know people can do it effectively to turn on the sympathetic, but to turn off the sympathetic, I mean, this is found among monks and really practiced people. Not so much.
So this research was all done in the 60s by the Russian cosmonaut program, where they can get their heart rate from, I forget if it was like 120 to like 40. Like one breath in is getting up to 120 and one breath out is like 40. Jesus. So like that's one breath. So it's just like super amount of responsiveness to, and it's the breath that's the primary access point, right? Because of the diaphragm's connection to the vagus nerve.
Fascinating.
Is this something that actually, from your experience, is that something that you've been able to train over a very long period of time? Did that take you to?
Dude, you can do it. So it's almost like there's a wall in front of you, Nick, but and the wall looks like it's made of concrete, but it's actually made of paper. And as soon as you get the confidence to step through that wall or run through that wall, you're like, oh, I get it now. So
right.
Like gaining access to that parasympathetic nervous system, man, can happen like this. But here's the thing, there's a fear response that happens, right? So your brain goes, if I slow down my breath too much, what happens? I want to like breathe in, I want to gasp. So you have to learn to let go, man. You have to learn to just let go of the tension, let go of the conscious or unconscious tension that exists. And once you do, you're like, oh. So here's an example. People are surprised when I say I can do a 60 to 70 second inhale and a 60 to 77 exhale consistently. Like 70 seconds of inhalation for people is very long. Yeah. But dude, everyone can do it. You won't allow yourself to relax enough to surrender into it, right? You have to really let things relax. It's a bit of a skill as well. But most people do an inhalation, exhalation, they get like 10 seconds. Like, well, you can do so much more than that. You're just afraid to go into that discomfort because it's unusual to you, right? First time you train legs, that burn is like foreign. You're like, fuck this, I'm out. But eventually you realize like, oh, that burn is what causes benefit. So when you get that little uncomfortable feeling in your breath, you're like, oh, that's a good thing. Stay there, right? Do
you think all these skills that you've possessed now would have furthered your bodybuilding career if you knew all these things?
1,000%, man. Absolutely 1,000%. And I knew a little bit about heart rate variability and recovery, but not to the extent I do now. It would have absolutely made me a significantly better athlete. So here's the way I teach this to people, Nick. And bodybuilding is this beautiful opportunity, right? I still believe it's a beautiful opportunity because you're in a controlled environment and you're testing your character. You're testing your will. You're testing your virtue. You're like, I'm going to go in there and be disciplined. I'm going to go in there and work hard. I'm going to move toward my fears. Right? That's an opportunity that exists in bodybuilding if you're conscious of it. But how do most people do bodybuilding, right? That's how, in an ideal world, how we should do bodybuilding. I'm disciplined. I'm moving toward my fears. I'm going to be strong today. I'm going to empower myself. I'm going to feel good about myself. That's what exists in exercise and bodybuilding. Well, how do most people do bodybuilding? Well, they go in the gym. They go, man, I want to fucking PR today, and I'm going to lift more weight today because I want to show people on Instagram. And I want, it's all about external gratification, instant gratification, and it's about I have to do it. Like, oh, I have to train today because I got a show. I have to train today because my coach said so. I have to train today, otherwise I'm going to be fat. So you're literally embodying all of these negative emotions in your mind, right? And versus like you can embody and all these positive emotions and virtues in your body and mind, right? So it's always just literally a choice. It's a conscious framing. Am I choosing the I have to attitude, which makes you a victim, or am I choosing the I get to attitude, which makes you empowered? It's literally just like when I step in the gym today, what conscious choice am I making? And if someone had told me that 15 years ago, I'd be a different human being today. And I'm grateful for all my struggles, man, because they made me who I am. But I want to lead this charge around like, hey, man, every time you step in the gym, it's literally just I have to versus I get to. I get to honor my body. I get to challenge my body. I get to appreciate what this thing does for me. It shows up for me every day. Every scar on my body is a gift because my body's healed itself and I didn't have to do anything. I get to step into my fears. When I walk up to a bar, there's no question I'm afraid. But today I'm not going to be afraid because I know I can do this, and it's a controlled environment, right? So I can do fear, I can do inadequacy in a controlled way, right? Whereas other ways to do it in life, it's like I have to step into war, I have to step into fights, I have to step into things, and that's going to build your character. And those are huge potential negative side effects. Yeah. Whereas in the gym, you have all these. It's a controlled environment, man. I can develop all these character traits without having to face injury or death.
Yeah.
A couple of brief questions about bodybuilding before we finish. What are your thoughts on this kind of pumping workout, putting the blood in the muscle, keeping the muscle engaged with low weights without actual heavy tension? Why does that work? I don't know anything about this. I've never trained for hypertrophy. Because we're talking earlier about neurological efficiency and then increasing tension on the muscle and using it at the right angles.
I think you're trying to say like these active recovery workouts that people do, right?
No, basically, I'm talking about like the bodybuilders that lift. The Canadian bodybuilder Paul Dillett, for example, known not to lift heavy weights. He just
Oh, so you're saying a bodybuilder just in general, not lifting heavy weight?
Yeah,
not pushing.
But somehow the muscle's growing. What is that?
Well, so Leo, here's a good way to think about this, man. Exercise, and the way I often will teach it, exists in two places, right? Exercise exists outside of the body, and exercise exists inside of the body. And it's the dynamic relationship between those two that you should be thinking about. So exercise outside of the body is the weight, right? It's the exercise. It's maybe the sets and reps and volume, right? Like that stuff exists outside of the body. But what exists inside the body? Well, the engine, right? The muscles, the thing that's actually creating motion. So it's the dynamic interaction between the inside and the outside, the internal and the external, that causes the internal response. So what's happening outside of my body, it would make sense then, is only useful in as much as it creates an internal result or an internal response, right? So all these things happening outside of the body, which is where most people, call it 95 or 98% of people place their attention, is only useful if it creates the proper or adequate internal response or result, which is like, I want to create the signal for muscle building, or I want to create this energy deficiency to burn fat, or whatever it is, right? So we have to start looking at it like that from a perspective of like, this external exercise, this external thing we call exercise, can elicit a different signal for every body, right? Depending how you do it. So you have to start quantifying the interaction between the external and the internal. So someone like Paul Gillette, maybe he just needed a very low signal to elicit the internal response. Everyone's signal is different. Everyone's kind of threshold to turn on the muscle building switch is different. You have people who are probably the top bodybuilders in the world who have a lower threshold for muscle building. Their muscle protein synthesis gets turned on with less signal. Right? Then you have people who are, we'll call it hard gainers, and then we don't want to put people into categories because I think that's a bad idea, but who need more signal. There's a lot of reasons for that, right? So there's things that override the signal for muscle building. So stress, cortisol, inflammation, those things override the signal for muscle building because your body will place a higher priority on those things and like, hey, we want to allocate resources to those stress things. And this muscle building recovery thing, this is a lower level priority. So there's a lot of reasons why low levels of signal can work for people. And there's a lot of reasons why it won't. So it depends on the state of your internal system, right? So what is the state of my nervous system, my muscular system, my endocrine system, my gut? Like all these different systems have to be adequately functioning for you to respond to any signal, right?
Do you want to turn, like when you have bodybuilders, do you want to turn the parasympathetic nervous system on immediately after they finish exercising?
That's a great question. I believe you do. Yeah, I believe you do. I don't think there's any... Yeah, so I often quote, we want 2 hours of sympathetic and 22 hours of parasympathetic, and 2 hours of parasympathetic is in the gym, or sympathetic is in the gym.
And example, like to the audience, just to imagine that a lot of the audience are PED users. Like the reason you don't use trenbolone all off season and not use, have that sympathetic nervous drive all the time, you won't gain that much muscle if you try it.
Well, there's an interesting perspective there. So maybe again, I don't know. I can give you an opinion, but most importantly, like the way I would suggest everyone approaches their life is treat yourself like a natural athlete. So if you've ever done anything naturally, your diet has to be perfect. Your recovery has to be perfect. Your training has to be incredible, impeccable. So otherwise you don't grow, right? And then if you add PEDs on top of that, and all of a sudden stuff starts to happen, right? The thing with most bodybuilders, they take PEDs and they think they can just fuck around with everything else, right? We can take a bunch of party drugs. We don't have to sleep. We can do whatever. We're still going to grow because they do still grow. Why? Yeah. Because hormones, ultimately PEDs, are the autonomic override. They're the ultimate autonomic override. They just kind of shut down all the stress and your body still grows. That doesn't mean that you're getting the most out of that stuff, right? So you should be paying attention to all the other things. So 5 minutes of relaxed breathing after you train is one of the best ways to turn off that sympathetic arousal and turn on the parasympathetic arousal. Now your body starts to grow exponentially more. You don't need to take PEDs. You're growing faster than everybody else without it. If you decide to add on top of it, fucking awesome, you're going to grow. But if you don't, that's okay too, right? Because you're still going to grow faster than everybody else. And the other beautiful thing is, when you're in a sympathetic state, your body is typically dependent on the glycolytic energy system, which means it's dependent on carbohydrates. If you're in a parasympathetic state, your body tends to be more dependent on the oxidative energy system, which means it's more dependent on fat while you're at rest. So which one do you think you want to be if you're a bodybuilder? You want to be in sympathetic or parasympathetic? You want to burn more fat at rest, right? So I want to be more parasympathetic, which means I'm more oxidative, which means I'm burning more fat at rest. So how do we know? Anyone ever get hangry when you're competing or when you're not eating every 3 hours? Yeah, so that tells you your body's ripping through all the carbohydrates and not burning fat at rest, right? So we want to get into this fat burning at rest by simply switching our body into a more parasympathetic balance.
I'm glad you agree. This is one of the themes of my channel I've been trying to promote, is that people should go into the parasympathetic nervous system after they train to enhance their recovery. This is excellent. The final question I have for you is, since you've transformed your life, I know you have a very big facility in Florida, and you established a lot of, basically your life revolved around bodybuilding. And now what I see is you have a podcast in which you invite guests that talk about mindfulness and all kinds of different subjects about personal growth. Have you gotten bored with bodybuilding at all? You know what I mean?
Yeah, man, to be honest, yes. So I think everyone starts off in bodybuilding or in muscle building or in fitness and is very focused on the tactics, right? Like I want to understand sets of reps, and I want to understand execution, and I want to understand programming. And those are what I call tactics. And, that's 10% of what exists in bodybuilding. That's also 10% of what exists in body transformation, right? So you got to understand how to do that shit. But what about everything else, right? What about the psychological piece? What about the autonomic piece? What about the endocrine piece? What about the digestion piece? And so many other things that go into it. So to be honest, yes, bodybuilding, like once you kind of feel like, man, I figured it out. Like I feel like I could take anyone and put any amount of muscle on them, depending on their ability to commit and their ability to work and their ability to follow a plan. It's almost like it's not a challenge anymore, right? It's like, I got that. Okay, what's the next challenge? I'm a problem solver by nature, man. Like I figured this out. What's next, right? So, and then people always think like, oh no, man, I'm going to do this forever. I'm like, no, you're not, man. If you're someone who's growth minded, you too will figure out how much of this training you need for yourself or for your clients. And then you're going to be like, okay, I got that now. I have that skill set. What can I do next? It's kind of like learning a language, right? Like, hey man, I got the English language on hold now. I figure out, for the most part, I got this language figured out. I'm still going to do it. I'm still going to read books in the English language, but now I'm going to learn Spanish, and then I'm going to learn French, and then I'm going to learn Arab. And like, that's just a growth mindset for me. So it's like, okay, I got that one language down, which is the muscle building language. As much as I will ever need to build any amount of muscle in any human being. Do I understand all the research perfectly? No. Do I understand all the physiological processes necessary? No, but I don't need them, right? I don't need them to get the result that I'm after. I can make any bodybuilder on the planet better. That sounds arrogant, but it's true. So what the hell else is there to solve? So I still enjoy it. I still teach people how to build muscle. But now I start to ask the question to people who enter my life. I say, okay, you want to put on a bunch of muscle. That's awesome. Why? Well, I think I want to look bigger. I think the girls will like it. Okay, why do you want the girls to like you? Well, I want to be accepted, or I want to be loved, or I want to be, whatever their answer is. Okay, well, why don't we go after that instead? Because you realize, and this is my realization, I made it to the top of the best contest in the world, and it didn't give me all those things that I hoped it would have, right? It didn't make me more confident, didn't make me more loved, it didn't make maybe girls wanted you more, but even when you got the girls, you kind of didn't feel any different about yourself anyways, right? So that's the awareness, man. It's like, we could still go through all the muscle building stuff, but why don't we just go straight to the root of the problem? And then you can decide if you do still continue with this muscle building thing, you're doing it for a different reason. You no longer need to do it. You now want to do it. So now you're no longer a victim to muscle building. You can now be empowered by muscle building, right? It's the difference. So rather than like, I need this, I have to do it, otherwise I don't feel good about myself. It's like, no, man, I fucking love muscle building. This shit makes me feel better. This is amazing. Like this, I love this. Yeah. See the simple framing switch? Yeah. Man, if we can make the whole fitness industry see this differently, I think we could literally change the direction of the entire world. And not everyone's going to want to see this shit. Everyone's like, oh, just shut up and lift heavy. Yeah. Like, man, when you're ready to hear it, I'm here for you. I'm not trying to shove something down your throat. I'm not trying to convince you the earth is round when you think it's flat. I'm just here. If you want to have a conversation, I'm here to support.
Yeah. A final question. That was supposed to be my final one, but I wanted to ask you, what do you think is a recipe or a recipe with themes that gave you happiness in your life, or subjective well-being or contentment? With our heart.
It's a good question, and I like that question. Here's what I think it is. There's a number of layers, Leo. The first thing that will prevent you from ever being happy is living in someone else's value system. So when you make your daily priorities in alignment with someone else's values, whether it be your parents, your friends, your colleagues, your business, your boss, whatever, you will never be happy. So here's an example. I bought my son for Christmas. I bought him a remote control car. It's the exact equivalent of his best friend. And he wanted it. He's like, Dad, I really want this car. And his best friend loves this RC car. And all he wants to do is play with it constantly. My son only plays with it when he's with that other kid. He comes home and goes, I don't really want to use it. So what does that tell me about him? He doesn't value the RC car. He values the connection with that other boy. Right. So when he goes and plays with the other boy, he's living in that other boy's value system. So he's never going to get the same amount of fulfillment out of that car that the other boy will. The other boy just he's so inspired by this RC car. That's all he wants to do. Whereas my son's living in that other boy's value system. So we do that all the time, right? We see people out there who are like, oh, I want to hang out with that person. So we subordinate our wants and needs and our values to theirs. We're like, oh, I'm just going to go live inside their values. And that could be in a spouse, in a boss, and even in your parents. So you're living in their value system. When you're living in their value system, you will never be inspired. You will never be happy. You'll never be fulfilled, period. So that's kind of step one, right? Moving beyond that, we can go into depth about how to maybe start exploring that. But I think the next step is honesty. And being honest with yourself and being honest with the people around you is imperative because here's an example. If Nick and I are, we're becoming friends the first time I met him, and Nick goes, hey man, this is kind of a real story, so I'll say it. He goes, hey man, you want to go to get some frozen yogurt? And I go, fuck yeah, man, I love frozen yogurt. And in reality, I hate frozen yogurt, but I just kind of want to hang out with Nick because he's such a cool guy. I'm lying, and he's going to start to like me based on the fact that he thinks we have something in common. We're going to go hang out and do this frozen yogurt thing. But in my mind, I'm like, oh man, Nick doesn't really like me for who I am. I don't want to tell him I don't like frozen yogurt because he likes it, right? So that relationship right off the bat, I started off with a disconnect in our communication. So you're liking me for something that I'm not. So our relationship right off the bat has failed. And this happens daily, right? Yeah. With male-female dynamics or male-male, whatever your thing is. It always happens. It's like you're trying to step into their values and make them accept you for who you are rather than being who you are. You can never be happy, right? And you're not even giving them a chance to love you for who you are. You're putting forward what you think is your best foot or what is ultimately a facade. And so you're ultimately being dishonest, and you are, one, not accepting yourself for who you are. So you're not honoring yourself. You're not even giving them a chance to love you. And that's for all the good parts and all the quote unquote bad parts. I'll put that in quotations because there's no fucking bad parts. It's just who you are. It's just your humanness, right? So accepting who you are in all aspects of your humanness is an important part of ultimately being quote unquote happy or fulfilled or actualized or whatever the word that we want to use is.
How do you find out who you are? Sorry, this keeps going on.
No, dude, it's just being honest with yourself and going, well, what do I love? And who do I want to be? And why do I act this way? And what brings me pain? And what brings me joy? And exploring your emotions, right? Your emotions are the key, not your rational thoughts, right? Your rational thoughts is this construct being placed there by society or by something else. You have to explore what does this make me feel? Does this make me feel good? Does this make me feel inspired? So that's how you find, like, if there's something that makes you angry, you're living out of alignment or it's out of alignment with what you value, right? So look at it and explore what are the things that make me happy? What are the things that make me sad? What are the things that make me angry, mad? And explore the entire range of human emotions. And eventually that will start to leave clues as to, God, really this thing over here, whatever this, fucking making baskets really makes me happy. And I don't give a shit what anyone else thinks. I'm just going to fucking do this because this is what makes me happy. And guess what happens when you do that? All of a sudden, all these other people who like secretly love making baskets go, man, I want to do that too. You want to do that too? That's a really bad example, but you get the idea. Like, yeah, like, oh God, it's such a weird thing, but I want to do that too. And all of a sudden you find your family, right? What I'll call your family. These people who like some way you guys are connected at the soul level. You're like, man, I didn't ever want to tell anybody that I really like, I don't know, fucking wasabi flavored yogurt. But that's what I love. And you'll get all these people around you who go, oh, me too. I didn't want to share that. And you have like this real true bond at your heart, at your soul, right? You're living in a parallel value system because you were courageous enough to be honest with yourself and honest with them. And so many people are lonely and so many people are disconnected because they try to live someone else's values, all these values being imparted on them by society and by the US, marketing, merchandise life. So anyways, man, I don't want to go too deep into that stuff.
Do you still get the same enjoyment out of weight training in the gym? No, because it's not with the same purpose, Nick. And I don't even know that I ever enjoyed it, man. To be honest, I'm at that point too, though.
Yeah.
I have a very hard time being connected to the gym anymore.
Well, because you're not purpose driven anymore, right? As soon as that purpose goes away, dude, that's what happened to me in 2000. The reason I retired officially was because like I would go to the gym every day and I would stare at the wall. It was a completely empty gym. It was my gym. Nobody else in there. I would stare at the wall and go, what's my purpose? Why am I here?
I did the same thing.
Whereas before I knew like I want to be Mr. Olympia and I want to be the best bodybuilder in the world. And I said to myself, if I was Mr. Olympia next year and my kids said I was not there, I was an asshole, I was whatever, would it be worth it to me? And of course not. So I was completely comfortable with retiring.
Yeah.
Once your purpose goes away, man, you can't have the same fire.
Yeah, no. Yeah, my fire went out totally because of that same. I've tried to fight it too recently, and now I've just recently just I just completely disconnected. And it's much better though. It's much better that I'm just okay with being disconnected though, and I've learned that it's okay to be disconnected from that. It was part of my life at one point, but obviously I still try to achieve the greatest possible health, but just not weight training is just not what my purpose is anymore.
Yeah. And here's the thing, man, I went through that. So for 18 months, I barely trained. I did yoga every day. Basically, I did tons of walking. I did tons of fasting. I lost 70 pounds or something.
Yeah.
And then once I was done that, because I was okay with not training anymore, I actually was like, hey, you know what? I actually want to train. Rather than I have to train, I want to train. I was like, man, this is a very different place. So now I train when I want to train.
Right.
And I still like to be able to hang with some people that come into town. You get some bros coming into town. Like, I still want to be able to whoop your ass. Yeah. But I don't need to do it multiple days a week anymore, right?
That's a competitive nature in you, though.
Yeah, that's not going away. That's not going away. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ben, for spending your time with us. I really
thank you, man.
On behalf of
if you could squeeze me another hour one day, that'd be nice too.
What do you want to talk about, man?
Oh, there's a lot of things we can go into, but I don't want to spend too much time here.